really listen or read through 3 or 4 times during the first week.
Well, hello out there. We've been chit-chatting. We got done with worship a little early. So welcome to Bible study. For those of you that are joining us via YouTube, whether live or later on in the week. Oh, Rich Johnson is there. Hi, Rich. Welcome. So we're a little lighter in number this week than normal. But tonight I'm joined by Neil and Gail and Karen here in this space. Rich is out there. And somebody else has joined us also. But unless you have some sort of a YouTube, Google sort of an account, I can't tell who you are. But you can always type down there in the right-hand corner and ask me your questions, whether I know who you are or not, and I will do my best to answer those. I guess in the intervening time there, I should have gotten my notes up on my iPad, but I did not. So let me take the time to do that now. We are, I think we're like on week 4. No, week 5, I think, of our Mark Bible study. And if you have somewhere available a map,
I don't know.
Part 3.
we're on part 3.
Yeah, but it's a fourth.
There's a
The
prologue.
prologue, yes.
We did a prologue, plus we did an overview week.
Okay.
So I think I was right.
Of course you were.
I know. Yeah.
Did I play that?
As I tell my children, that's my cross to bear. Do you think I like always being right? If you have a map of the Galilean area, that's where we're gonna start pretty close. But so if you have a handout from previous times, you can always be in touch with me, pastor@celebration-lutheran.org, and I'm happy to get you the handout for the day. But long ago, yes, that's the map that you're looking for. Long ago, I gave you a map. Oh, that's interesting. Wonder why that did that. And so and so we're going to use that map pretty quickly. We are starting tonight at chapter 6, verse 7. Chapter 6, verse 7. If for some reason you missed some of these sessions, and they're all available, so you can go back and watch them. Or if you people need extra help and you have to go back and watch them again, or you could come to noon, where we move much more slowly and go much more in depth. I don't know if we do or not, but we take 2 weeks for every week that we do in here. So we're going to start at chapter 6, verse 7. And verses 7 through 29 here in chapter 6, in my mind, work as sort of a transition between the section that we had before, which was really all about Jesus redefining family and then being on the sea, if you remember. And now there's this little transition, because then the rest of the time that we're in this section, Jesus is really talking a lot about food. We're going to talk about your impressions and your impressions of what of this particular section. But first, let's talk about this transition. So the first thing that Jesus does in verse 7 is he calls the 12 and he sends them out, right? He's already named them apostles. which is simply a Greek word that means to send. So he names them then that before, and now he actually sends them out. So it's pretty clear here that Mark named them apostles because he knew that they were getting sent out. So he sends them out
2 by 2,
2 by 2,
just like the ark.
just like one version of the Ark story, right? Yes, because otherwise it would be 7 by 7, and there were only 12 of them. So
Or the other version.
yeah. So and he sends them out and he gives them some instructions, and they went out and they proclaimed that everyone should repent, and they cast out demons. So it was a pretty successful going out sort of process for them. It seems to have been pretty good. But as we read on, I don't know about you, but as you read on for the rest of this particular part, you're like, really? They don't seem to be very smart, and yet he sent them out already. Right? So
Sink or swim.
yeah, right, exactly. So if you took the time to read chapters 6, 7, and a little bit of 8, then you came away going, boy, these disciples really aren't very smart. But here Mark says, no, they did okay. Then you have this story about John the Baptist and his untimely and rather gruesome end. Any ideas why this might be important?
There must have been something going on in the communities. I would think of potentially some sort of thing like this or something. I don't know. Persecution of people.
So you think maybe some persecution
Yeah, I
might
don't
have been going on?
I'm just
Okay.
guessing. I'm winging it.
You're winging. That's most scholars wing it. They make educated guesses based on the text. That is certainly a possibility that some people were being, so it would be a sort of, well, if you're getting persecuted, you're in good company because look what happened to John the Baptist, right? Okay.
And of course, it's like David. There's some naughty stuff going on here. It sounds like.
Yes, there is some.
That's the best way I could put it.
There is some naughty stuff going on in chapter or verses 17 through 29. There's definitely some stuff that doesn't seem right. Personally, I think that, well, before I jump in with what I think, any other thoughts about why this John the Baptist story might be in here?
Well, somebody came and took his body and laid it in a tomb, but I don't think he came back in 3 days.
So yes, so he gets laid in a tomb, doesn't come back. So it seems, if you look at this,
Or was this
So-
to avoid confusion of who was the Messiah?
yeah,
I'm a biblical scholar tonight.
yes, you are. You're picking up slack for the pastor who's feeling less than her normal.
But is that it? That they had to get rid of John the Baptist so there was no confusion about who the Messiah was?
So probably John the Baptist did get killed off. Like there are several stories in scripture about John the Baptist being imprisoned and killed. But what seems to be happening is that Jesus is being linked up with Elijah, right? And then, or John, whom I beheaded, has been raised, right? So there's some talk there that maybe Jesus is John the Baptist resurrected, right? And so I think this is Mark's way of saying, all right, people, I know that these are the stories out here, but that is not what is going on here, right? And because you mentioned the story of Herod and beheading, you probably have to tell the story then. For whatever reason, this story is actually in the lectionary cycle, the 3-year lectionary. I cannot figure out why. For the life of me, I cannot figure out why the story of the beheading of John is
What's that sermon like?
right. That's when I go to the epistle lesson. That's what that sermon is like. Because I'm a smart homiletician. So
Well, Mark was trying to make sure that we understand that John was not the Messiah. Don't we all need to be reminded once in a while?
yes.
But we don't have to be in such a morbid way of doing it.
Well-
And this whatever kind
Yeah.
of dance she was doing, I don't know if she was downtown on the flats or
But when Mark describes something in such detail, we're told, listen up.
Yeah, it's
And
very
if he hadn't
detailed.
Detailed it, we might not listen.
It is very, very detailed, and Mark doesn't do that very often, which is why it's fascinating as we move forward. Why there are 2 mass feedings, right? Really interesting. All right. Well, moving on to some geographical sorts of things. You have your map there, so we're gonna track this section because this section is especially indicative of. Do you remember when I told you Mark doesn't care about geography and chronology? He's interested in theology, right, and how a good story gets put together. These chapters are just really great. Once we map them, you're going to be like, oh. And then we're probably going to be able to make some other surmises as well. So the stories start out tonight across from Bethsaida with the loaves and fish, because after he feeds the loaves and fish, he goes across the sea to Bethsaida. So Bethsaida is on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee.
is it on here?
Where'd it go?
I think
No.
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 Okay, so it's on the northern.
Oh.
So we'll just put an X there.
Yeah.
See
Do you
what
have
that
Chorazin
is?
on yours?
Mhm.
Yes. So just to the east of Chorazin. I will show you all here.
What's that?
Here,
That's
this
right
is
there.
Bethsaida. It
Bethsaida.
says Julius here. Ignore that. This is Bethsaida
That's
right there. So all right. So we start across from Bethsaida. So where would across from Bethsaida be? Maybe Magdala? I don't think you have
You got a
Magdala.
different map. than
How about
that.
Tiberias? Do you have?
No.
Oh, let me see your map here. So Tiberias would be about right here. So maybe there, and Magdala is where who is from?
Mary Magdalene.
Exactly.
Oh, I'm being finished today.
You want to just mic drop and leave now? Somebody else has joined us. Welcome. So
I heard Neil was on a roll.
So yeah, yes, number 3. Yeah, they're flocking in now because they heard that Neil's the top scholar today. So I'm not sure where across would be from Bethsaida. So then, he after being in Bethsaida, then they go to Gennesaret, which is just up the coast from Magdala that we just talked about. So here, I will show you. So it might be right around here. All right. So here's Here's where Bethsaida was, and here's Gennesaret, somewhere right in here. Ignore that. I will show you all now. So here's the Sea of Galilee. Here's Bethsaida, and somewhere over here is Gennesaret. Okay, so now, so just so far in the chapter, he's done something over here. He went over here, and now he's back over here, right? Okay, then this is where it gets really crazy. So then he goes to Tyre. Tyre is way over on the coast, up near,
Way up there.
yeah, way north on your map. So my map here doesn't help you, but it's like up here.
Mhm.
So Tyre. Then now can you find Sidon on your map? No, I don't think it's north of Tyre.
No,
It's
those
on the
were cut
coast.
off, so.
Okay, so Sidon is north on the coast of Tyre. You can find the Sea of Galilee, right? So here, so Sidon is up here, Tyre is here, Sidon is here. Here's the Sea of Galilee, and the Decapolis, which is down here just below. It's a region, sort of like
Oh,
Galilee,
yeah.
and it's yeah. So that's the Decapolis. All right. So here are the directions that Mark says. From Tyre, he goes by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee and the Decapolis. He has no idea about the geography of this area. Just none. Why you would go by way of Sidon, which was north, in order to go southeast.
Google Maps sometimes doesn't know what it's doing.
That's true. Then, after going all the way down towards the Decapolis, down in there, then he goes back, you guessed it, to Bethsaida. So it is pretty clear that it's pretty clear, one, that this is not the way that people who travel on foot would travel. Even if they have boats going back and forth across the Sea of Galilee. This is not the way. I would posit that Mark just doesn't know the geography of the Galilee region because he's from someplace further away, maybe even outside of Israel.
In turn, would that mean maybe he doesn't know the order in which the events took place?
It's possible he has no idea the order of the events, and really it didn't matter to him or to an ancient audience. Yeah, so he could be from for example, one of Paul's communities, right? He could be a Corinthian. He could be a Thessalonian. He could be from a Philippian, right? He could be from any of these. Did you find another map?
Yeah.
I could not find a decent map that had all the stuff on it that I wanted on it. I'm going to point out why I think that Mark might actually be part of a Paul community in a little bit. Why I built this hypothesis today. You do not need to buy it because I literally built it an hour and a half ago. So it's not, no. So the main thing being here that Mark doesn't really know geography, or Mark doesn't, that's not the important part, except that he does take great pains to say, yes, so he went to the Decapolis by way of Sidon, which is weird. I mean, it's just a strange way to go. So when we get to, we're going to come back to, we're going to end tonight with the all the feeding verses. Okay, so we're going to jump. We're not going to go right through these verses tonight like we've been doing. So the next thing we're going to look at is really the food prohibitions. This is part of my hypothesis that I'm working on. The food prohibitions, which are in chapter 7. So if you jump to chapter 7, verse 1, and it's the first 24 verses of chapter 7. No, 23 verses of chapter 7. And this is this exchange that goes on between the religious leaders and Jesus about washing hands and this, that, and the other. So the first thing I want to do is I want to remind you about the whole shame and honor system and how that plays into here. That the religious leaders are trying to put Jesus in his place, and ultimately, of course, because he's the hero of the book, he ends up putting them in their place. So, but you do have this exchange, and in the end, Jesus wins the argument. Now, part of this whole argument, and we've had a conversation like this before, is what is the purpose of the law in a Jewish mindset? And oftentimes we think, oh, well, it's just, to keep people in line. But Jewish law was meant so that the sacredness of God would find its way into every aspect of life. So that you wash your hands, in this particular instance with our section tonight, you wash your hands as a reminder that what you're about to do is a gift from God and it is sacred. You bless food so that you remember that all food comes from God. It wasn't a sense of you have to do this or else. The laws were really developed so that the holiness of God could pervade all of life. Now, the problem becomes when the law is more important, right, than what's going on. And so that's what Jesus points out here when he's talking about Corban. Corban, this is when, so they're talking about food and eating with defiled hands. And Jesus is like, oh, you've made rules just for the sake of making rules. And you actually are hurting people by your rules. And then he picks this honor your father and mother one. So basically, Corban was when you dedicated something to God. So if I were to say to my mother, well, Mom, I know that you can't afford to be in your own house anymore, but I've dedicated that income to give to you so that you can live some. I've dedicated that to God. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to be destitute. Right? So what has happened is there's some loopholes. And so what Jesus is saying is, all right, you're supposed to honor your father and mother, but then you apply basically a higher law to it. Like, oh, but I've dedicated that to God, so I can't give it to my mother to help care for her in her old age. Oh, well, because I gave it to God. And so that seems good, except that I'm not honoring my mother by so doing. So Jesus is like, you're full of crap, basically, is what he ends up saying. And then he goes into this whole thing that what is crucial is what comes out of your heart. So he says you can't eat things that go in and have them defile the person. Instead, what defiles something is what comes out of your heart, what comes out of your mouth, how you're acting, thinking, behaving, right? Which also then means, and there's a parenthetical reference, right? That Mark was saying it's okay to eat anything. Interesting. This is exactly why I think Mark was from a Pauline community.
Is it wheat and pork?
Because basically Paul said the same thing to one of his communities, and that is, eat whatever you want. It's okay to eat whatever you want, but don't do it if it's going to make somebody else stumble. So, we'll take an alcoholic, for example, because there's a stumble for you, right? So if you've got an alcoholic in your family and they are new to recovery and you're throwing them a birthday party, do you throw them a cocktail party?
Preferably not.
I think not. Right? Yes, you can, because just because you're not an alcoholic doesn't mean why should you abstain, right? You can do that. Paul said, do not be an occasion for someone to stumble. So, is it okay for me to say that Jonah is a parable and not an actual story? Of course, it's okay for me to say that unless it causes Gail to stumble. At which point, I have to look at Gail and say, Gail, if you need it to be a story that happened to a guy named Jonah, that's okay, right? So, I think that Mark was part of some community that Paul had converted because he doesn't know the geography, and he has this rather liberal, if you're a Jew, a pretty liberal understanding of eating practices. So pretty interesting. That's just my 2 cents and what I think. Nobody online has argued with me yet. So. All right. We're going to move to all the feeding stories. Tell me what, as you were reading through these 3 portions of these 3 chapters, what are some things you noticed about anything? It can be anything. It doesn't have to be about feeding.
things that stuck in my head is that when Jesus sent the apostles out, he said, do not take. So that what I was thinking is they had to go in blind faith and believe that there would be something provided, which as humans is never an easy thing to do.
Exactly. So what's fascinating to me is that faith that they show when they go out, they do not show in the rest, right? I mean, the section that I had you reading ends with them in a boat having an argument about one loaf of bread. Like, oh crap, he's gonna find out we only brought one loaf of bread. Right?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. That's an interesting point. Like, how come they're good about it there, but then they turn around and they're like, duh.
Human nature. It's easy to jump off the cliff. It's the landing that's the tough part. Yeah, somewhere in between you start thinking, well, is this really going to work?
Am I gonna? Yeah. Interesting. What else might you have noticed, or did you notice?
Well, 7's a special number too, right?
7 is a special number.
So that's one of his mysterious things there, because it in 20 and 21, and then he goes, "You do not yet understand
Mhm.
about 7." So
This is chapter 7,
I don't know, chapter 8.
chapter 8, 20 and 21.
Did I go
Um,
too far?
No, no, no.
No, 21 is where you ended it.
Yeah.
But-
Then he said to them, do you not yet understand? Yeah. So he's like, why are you so dumb?
What is it? What are we dumb about? What's the
Yeah.
7?
Well, I think he was saying,
Was it
sort
not
of like-
specific about the number 7, or was it just about the
well, I don't know.
The way I read that, it's the number 7.
Yeah. So I guess scholars have batted that around a little bit about the 7 and the 12. 12 has clear ties to
tribes.
the 12 tribes, the 12 apostles, right? So 12 is a really good sort of community number. And 7 is a holy number. It's a very, how many times are we supposed to forgive?
7 times 7.
7 times 70.
I heard something
How
about
many-
Noah had a 7.
Noah had 7 animals that got on. How many days of
Depends which
creation? 7. So 7 is this really holy number. And so I think that in this last thing, Mark is going, listen, people, why are you not getting this? And so he puts these words into Jesus's mouth in a sense of, okay, so let me get this straight, says Jesus. I fed 5,000 people, took up 12 baskets. I fed 4,000 people, took up a holy number of baskets. You're concerned about one loaf of bread and how you're going to eat. What are you not understanding? So that's what I hear Jesus saying. Like, I think the numbers are important, because why would you, again, your Mark, right? Narrative detail is not your
But
thing.
that's pretty detailed.
That's very detailed.
Well, the whole feeding thing, I think, is much more detailed than some of
It
the other.
is. It is. So I think that it means something. I'm going to point out in just a minute one other thing that's going to maybe even help more. Let's jump back and look at the feeding of the 5,000, which is in 8, right? So feeding of 5,000 is 8 no, it's not. That's the 4,000. Where are the 5,000?
Down further.
5,000 was first.
Oh, it's on Mark 6.
6.
Oh, whoops. He's redescribing, you're right.
Yes. So in 35,
Mhm.
chapter 6, verse 35. So you get this. So where have you heard these words before? Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples.
The Last Supper.
Yes. Yes. The Last Supper, Jesus takes, blesses, breaks, and gives. That exact
words.
those verbs. Exactly, right? When else has God given bread to a crowd of people?
Oh, tell what, the manna?
The manna from heaven. Neil is on fire. He must have had a really good Bible study teacher for the past 18 years. Or she just happens to know which questions that he actually knows the answers to. And she's trying to pat her own self on the back. So, yes. So, manna from heaven. So, is Mark trying to make a parallel with Moses? It's possible. It's possible. However, even more than that, you can't escape the imagery of the prophet Elisha, who was the successor to Elijah.
Why do you have to make the name?
So, this is from 2 Kings. A man came from Baal Shal Isha. Do you know where that is?
No, it's not here.
Bringing the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And Elijah said, give to the men that they may eat. But his servant said, how am I to set this before 100 men? So he repeated, give them to the men that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left, according to the word of the Lord. So, yes, manna from heaven, but certainly this story of Elisha and having some left over. So Mark is clearly drawing some parallels with Old Testament stories. And you get this extra, right? But there's clear. The other thing is in the Gospels, there are only 2 stories that are in all 4 of the Gospels. Mass feeding and walking on water. And if you remember the rule of multiple attestation, these are 2 things that probably happened. Don't know how. That's what makes them miraculous. But then I don't know how dialysis works either. And it's miraculous to me too. So you have this feeding of the 5,000. And then, not too much later, you get the 4,000, right? And this is in chapter 8. And not only do they have 7 baskets left over, but how many loaves do they start out with? 7. This is a super holy story here. Like, this is all about the mystery here. And once again, he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples. So once again, he takes, blesses, breaks, and gives. Now, what's interesting is that in between these 2 stories of tons and tons and tons of food, you have a story about crumbs, which, if you don't read the story all at once, you miss the fact that sandwiched sandwiched in between these 2 stories of abundant bread is a story about crumbs. Now, the story about crumbs is a Syrophoenician woman. She is not Jewish. She is Greek. And Jesus pretty clearly looks at her and says, no, the bread is only for Israel. And even St. Paul was like, we have to offer this to God's people first. And then if God's people are going to throw it out, then okay. But it goes first to God's chosen people. And she's Gentile. She makes no bones about it. And she says, she answers him. So Jesus basically calls her a dog, right? And she says, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." She's not asking for a whole loaf of bread. She's not asking to be treated the same. She is satisfied with crumbs. She's convinced that the crumbs will be enough. And indeed, they are. The crumbs do exactly what they want. The crumbs are enough. So it's a really interesting story to have on either side of this. And then, of course, you get the disciples in the end who are all concerned. So they've seen Jesus feed 5,000 people. They've seen Jesus feed the Syrophoenician woman, even only got crumbs. They've seen him feed 4,000 people, and then they sit in their boat and they say, "We don't have any bread, and we're really worried about this. How are we going to eat?" So as we wrap up tonight, I think it's really interesting to look at who gets it and who doesn't in this section of Mark's gospel. We're going to look at, so clearly the Syrophoenician woman gets it. She gets it. It's pretty clear the religious leaders don't get it. They're more concerned about washing hands and keeping laws. The disciples,
They're trying real hard.
They're trying hard, right? It's really interesting, and I don't know what to do with it. This when they're sent out 2 by 2.
Yeah.
And they just go and they're not taking anything and they're all excited about it and it works out for them. But then they're right there in that boat and they don't have bread and they're concerned about it. So I'm not sure what to do with that. I don't that's interesting to me. I don't think Mark worried about that. But I do. That's interesting to me. There's one more story in here that we didn't touch on, and that's the friends who bring the deaf man. The friends who bring the deaf man, which is chapter 7, verse 31. So
that's when they did this roundabout.
when
road
they
trip.
went the hoop-de-doo way to get wherever they ended up. And friends again. There are 3 friend stories in Mark's gospel. The first one is the paralyzed guy that they break through the roof, right? That was earlier. This is number 2. Number 3, you'll read for next time. But number 2 here is some friends bring the deaf guy to Jesus and beg Jesus to lay his hands on it. And Jesus snorkels him off to the corner
in town over.
and says, "Don't tell anybody." Of course, they couldn't help themselves. They had to tell. But what's interesting is that Jesus does this. Remember that somebody who was blind or lame or deaf or mute, all of this was because they or their parents sinned, did something that displeased God. There were no physiological reasons for this. These were all theological reasons for why people were not whole, is how they thought about it. And so you got to watch out because they could be unclean. And so you want to keep your distance from these people. And what does Jesus do?
Puts his hands on him.
Puts his hands right on him. And then, what do you remember about clean and unclean and the fact that body fluids should stay inside the body and any body fluids that come out make you, no wet willies in the ancient world, right? Because you needed to keep all of that where it needed to be or you would be unclean. And Jesus spits and then touches the man and gives him a wet
He
willy.
does that with somebody blind person too.
We're gonna, that's coming up
I'm
next
sorry.
time. No, that's good. He does. Interesting story, because it's Jesus doesn't get it right the first time. It's
Is
kind of
that-
like you.
Does that guy spit
right.
when he takes Paul? It's a you spit when the scales fall off of Paul's eyes.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't remember that. I don't remember that. So it's always interesting to see as we look at these what do you got going on there?
She's cleaning her pocket.
I saw something in my pocket. It's dried Play-Doh.
Dried Play-Doh. I just always think it's interesting to look and see which side, who is on the side of the text. Who is it that Mark is pushing? And Mark right now seems to be equally down on the religious leaders and the disciples. Like the disciples they're totally not getting it. And the people who are getting it are the sinners and the outcasts and the outsiders. They're the ones who are getting it. Yeah. Yeah, they're the ones getting it. So I think it's always interesting to see whose stories the authors are pushing. Oh, Rich Johnson. If someone believes a description from the Bible is a parable, but it is actually a real event, should I tell them, okay, it is just a parable that makes them feel better? Sure. I don't think it's about feeling better, though. I think it's more, Rich, about will it harm their faith? Will it push them further away from God? Or will, so in this case, if it is a real event, but they feel that it's a parable, will their knowing it being a real event somehow damage their relationship with God? That's it. It's not about feeling better, because I think that we can all be challenged, and sometimes what God has to say to us, it doesn't make us feel good. So it has to do more with how that is going to impact their faith. Hope that helps.
No spitting for Paul.
No spitting.
No spit.
Okay.
They just fell.
So
The
no
scales
spitting
just fell.
I know he's
For
talking
Gail to
Yeah.
improve her eyes.
Oh yeah, I got spit on her eyes. Then I'll spit on her.
Yes. That's yes, the second time. You should take that story once you read it. Take that story to your eye doctor the next time and say, look, even Jesus couldn't get it right the first time on this guy. You're welcome, Rich. So we're talking about the fact that Gail has had some eye issues, and she has to keep going back to her eye doctor. So I think you could make your eye doctor feel better by just saying, look, even Jesus didn't get it right the first time sometimes. Yeah. All right. So the next time that we get together, which is in a week, October 23rd, we're reading Mark 8:22 through 10:52. Mark 8:22 through 10:52. I think that's the end of 10. Let me see. It is. So from where we stopped tonight on 8 all the way through chapter 10. Any parting shots across the bow, Mr. Bible tonight? Do you have any last wisdom to impart to us?
No,
I could use it. Are you sure?
I'm sure.
You got nothing?
Got nothing.
That's too bad.
Go in peace, serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.
There. Neil has blessed us on our way. Thanks for joining us, those of you that were out there. And we'll see you in a week, either right here around the table or here on Facebook. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Drive safely tomorrow. Say hello to
Yes.
Donna.